everybody, it's Jason Blaha with Ice Cream Fitness here. Once again, it is time for the Gear Talk with Jason Q&A because I got enough good questions this week to justify doing it. But hold on, let me give you guys a bicep shot first. And let's get right into these questions. And I'm going to leave my glasses on today. It makes these a lot easier. Alright, first question. What causes Tren side effects like coughing and being out of breath, and is it dangerous? Some people say they get out of breath walking upstairs and even to stop having sex. LOL, thanks. Alright, the original coughing that people used to get, the dreaded Tren cough, and this is something I know of because when I used to be a chemist and a dealer years ago, we didn't have inundate and you really couldn't get that much Tren powder off the black market out of China. We would make it out of cattle pellets, and because we had to use so much alcohol to dissolve them and extract the trenbolone acetate out of the cattle pellets, it would leave fillers in there and it would leave a lot of alcohol in the mix no matter what you did with it. And so oftentimes if you were anywhere too near a vein and you would inject all that benzyl alcohol, it would cause coughing fits because of the alcohol hitting your bloodstream. Now, as far as the other effects, there's a lot of theories on this. The one that I think works best based upon the science is what causes this huge, massive hit to your cardiovascular stamina, your breathing, things like that when you're on trenbolone. And I think it's because of all of the inflammatory prostaglandins, which are inflammatory hormones that we know in animal studies that trenbolone massively increases the production of. Things like PGF2A, and it's all of these inflammatory hormones. And is it dangerous? Yeah, in the long term it is. That's one of the reasons why I say Tren is one of those compounds you do not want to stay on year round. There are simply much less harsh compounds to do that for people who blast and cruise. And that's why I recommend not using Tren for prolonged periods of time, because there's so much additional inflammation in the body as a result of it, and your cardiovascular health takes a huge hit. Your stamina takes a huge hit. Alright, next question. Jason, thoughts on cutting prop with grapeseed oil or B12? Alright, this is oftentimes done. Some people are asking this because of the amount of pip that prop has, because test prop requires so much alcohol to suspend. Even at 50 milligrams a milliliter, the amount of alcohol and other things that you need in there to suspend it is quite high compared to most other compounds. And so it tends to burn. And it tends to drop out of suspension easily. Now, cutting it with these other oils, you've got to remember, this isn't always a sterile process. If you can keep grapeseed oil sterile enough to blend with your prop, then odds are you probably should be homebrewing anyways. You probably have enough skill to just make your own gear. But it's also just as easily to blend it with other gears to cut down on that pip and to cut down on that crashing a bit. So if you're obviously most of the time not going to be using prop by itself, even if you're using a long chain ester with it, just blend the two into your frequent ejections. Now, as far as the B12, the issue there is that B12 is usually going to be water-based. You're not adding anything back to that prop to help keep it suspended, and one of the big reasons why prop can cause those lumps is because it can crash once it's inside your muscle and recrystallize. Because most of your anabolics are actually crystals at room temperature, where they're not suspended in oil and alcohol and everything. They're actually a crystal. They look like salt. And so it returns to that state inside your muscle while you dissolve it and get it into the bloodstream. And so that's why you'll get those big lumps sometimes, particularly from things like prop, because they're actually crashing. And the B12 is possibly going to make that worse, so that wouldn't be my first choice. Alright, next question. Hi Jason, just wondering if you could talk a bit about testosterone undecoinate in the form of andriol caps. I know you have spoken about andriol before, but I'm wondering if it would make a good base for a cycle, either with dianabol for bulking or with anavar for cutting. It interests me because I can obtain it cheaply here and legally, too. Plus, I am reading the studies correctly. They don't seem to have any estrogenic sides. Alright, in some ways this isn't a bad idea, but as long as you're looking at the andriol because it's cost effective and you're looking at the sides, it can be a replacement for testosterone for you. However, if you're doing it because everything you're listing for the most part to stack with it is an oral, I'm concerned that you're really getting focused on oral only cycles, so make sure that that's not what you're doing. I don't really recommend doing oral only stacks for the most part, because as the old expression goes, if you ain't penning, you ain't winning. The issue I see with stacking it with dianabol for bulking is that andriol is kind of a dry testosterone. It doesn't seem to exhibit the same estrogenic effects that normal testosterone does. You're worried about estrogenic side effects, but you're throwing debol in, which is going to have worse estrogenic side effects anyways. It's not necessarily helping yourself. If testosterone is cheaper, you would just stack that in. And even then, you're not going to run the dianabol for long periods of time, not enough to do a full proper bulking stack by itself. Now, this might be fine if you're a drug-tested strength athlete. This is absolutely a great stack, because dianabol will clear usually within 3 or 4 weeks. You'll be good for a drug test, and the andriol clears within 24 hours. So you can come off of it the day before your drug test and you're fine. But for anyone else, for purely a bulking stack, it would probably just be more effective to just go with regular testosterone. Now, even for a strength athlete, this next thing you listed is a very good idea for a strength athlete who is drug tested, particularly if you're wanting mostly dry gains and you need to make weight classes and things like that. That's really, really a good stack. And for cutting, I can absolutely see that. If you're trying to cut for the summer, Anavar plus andriol would be a very, very good combination. And it would be a very dry cut. So I don't think that's a bad idea, to be honest. Alright, next question. Since you have a background in passing tests, my question is, I'm on TRT and prescribed 200 milligrams a week. I followed that a year and just blasted for the past 12 weeks with 600 milligrams. How long before my levels return to baseline where 200 put me? As far as your actual testosterone levels, they're going to return to baseline within 2 to 3 weeks. So as soon as you go back to that 200 milligrams, your testosterone levels are going to be back to normal. But some of the negative effects, like if you saw a drop in HDL or some of that, it might take a few weeks longer for all of that to normalize, or things like your hemocrite levels. So some of those things can take a little while to normalize your health markers, but as far as your actual testosterone levels, it's very, very quick, 2 to 3 weeks. Because most of the enanthate and cypionate esters, they have a half-life of less than a week, as far as an active half-life, so it's going to drop pretty quickly. Something though that does get my attention is that you have a prescription for 200 milligrams a week. That's pretty high. That's very rare. Now, I don't know your specific situation, but most doctors are not going to prescribe that for most people for TRT, but it's very well possible that you may have, because I do know a guy, a good friend of mine, who gets a 250 a week script, but less than 1% of people are going to be able to get a prescription that high. Alright, last question. 2 questions. You can answer either. How often should someone who is on year-round get blood work done, and from your experience, what is an effective dose and time length to run Anavar? It's summer. People be cutting. Alright, to the first one, if you're blasting and cruising, I would get blood work done at least 2 to 3 times a year. Get your blood work done during your cruises, unless you need to do it during a blast to establish things like E2 levels, estrogen levels, and figure out how to keep those in check with your dosing of AIs for your standard blast. But once you get that established, there's no need to go back and do blood work, because you don't want to see your blood work on a blast. But on your cruises, that's when you're really concerned with making sure that all of your health markers are returning back to a baseline, and you're probably going to be cruising half of the year or more anyways, even if you're blasting and cruising. So that's really what you need to be focused on. So 2 to 3 times a year during your cruises, and more for blasting if you need to establish how to manage side effects and see your blood serum levels of things like estrogen. Now, as far as the Anavar I like to see anywhere from 6 to 10 weeks. I wouldn't run it past 10 weeks, because I notice usually at about the 12-week mark, most people's blood work just goes to complete shit on Anavar. Usually your HDL plummets and all sorts of other issues. So I usually say about 10 weeks is the most. Most orals, I would say 6 at the most, but again, Anavar is so much milder than other orals, and its liver toxicity is questionable as to if it even exists. But an effective dose on real Anavar, assuming you're not getting fake, is going to be anywhere between 40 and 100 milligrams in your stack, depending on how big you are, what you're stacking with, what your experience level is with gear. But for guys who are over 200 pounds, I'm going to say up to 100 milligrams a day, stacked with a little bit of test, is actually a great low side effect cutting stack. Alright guys, that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it has been informative, and I will talk to you next time.